Inside a mansion that loomed like a fortress of glass and cold stone lived a man named Park Dae-ho. He was the Iron Dragon, a boss whose name once made the pavement tremble. But now the dragon was silent. A mysterious accident had left him paralyzed, pinned to a wheelchair, unable to move a single finger or speak a single word. His eyes, once sharp enough to cut through lies, now stared blankly at the garden. People thought he was a hollow shell, a king without a kingdom. But inside that frozen body, Dae-ho was screaming. He saw everything. He heard the whispers in the hallways and the rustle of silk as his greedy relatives plotted his end. They treated him like a piece of furniture, talking about his vast wealth as if he were already in the ground. They did not know that a dragon, even a paralyzed one, never truly sleeps. They only saw a helpless old man, but they forgot that the most dangerous animal is the one that has nothing left to lose but its mind. In this house of vipers, there was only one soul who didn't look at Dae-ho with hunger in her eyes. That was Elena, a woman from a far-off land with skin like rich mahogany and a heart that held more secrets than the mansion's safe. She was the one who cleaned his room and wiped his brow. She was the one who truly watched. The air in the mansion grew heavy, like the sky before a great typhoon. Dae-ho's younger brother, Sang-woo, was a man with a smile that never reached his eyes. He walked into the master's suite, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor like the ticking of a death clock. He stood over his brother, looking down with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You've held on to the throne long enough, Dae-ho," Sang-woo whispered, leaning in so close that his breath fogged the window. "The board of directors is restless. The money is sitting idle. It's time for a change of leadership." Dae-ho's eyes remained fixed on a bird outside, but his heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to reach out and crush Sang-woo's throat, but his arms were like leaden weights. Sang-woo laughed softly, a sound like dry leaves rubbing together. He didn't see Elena standing in the shadows of the doorway, her hands clutching a tray of tea. She stayed as still as a statue, blending into the dark wood of the frame. She heard the brothers' plan to host a family dinner to celebrate Dae-ho's supposed recovery, but Elena knew better. She had seen Sang-woo meeting with a shady doctor in the garden at midnight. She had seen the small blue vial pass between their hands. The family dinner wasn't a celebration. It was an execution. The relatives weren't coming to toast to his health. They were coming to divide the spoils of his empire. Elena felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She was just a maid, a foreigner in a land of giants, but she had seen the way the boss's pupils tracked her movement. He was in there. Elena entered the room after Sang-woo left, the scent of his expensive cologne still hanging in the air like a poisonous mist. She moved quietly, setting the tea tray down on the side table. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she began to perform the daily ritual of stretching Dae-ho's stiff limbs. As she worked, she felt the tension in his muscles, a silent language of agony and rage. "They think you are a ghost, sir," she murmured, her voice a low, soothing hum. "But I have seen ghosts, and they do not have eyes that burn like yours." She looked directly into his dark irises, and for a split second she saw a flicker of recognition. It was a spark of fire in a frozen tundra. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The dinner tonight is a trap. Your brother has a medicine that does not heal. It is a medicine that makes the heart stop while the person is asleep." Dae-ho's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He was trapped, unable to warn anyone, unable to run. He was a prisoner in his own palace, waiting for the executioner's blade. Elena squeezed his hand, a hand that couldn't squeeze back, and leaned in even closer. "I am just a maid from a village across the ocean, but my grandmother taught me how to spot a snake in the tall grass. You treated me with respect when I first arrived before the accident. You gave my family a future. I will not let them take yours." She pulled a small cloth from her pocket. "Tonight, the plates will be many, but the truth will be one. Trust me, sir." The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, bloody shadows across the mansion's courtyard. The relatives began to arrive, one by one, like crows gathering on a fence. There was Aunt Juan, whose jewelry clinked like coins in a jar, and Cousin Minho, a gambler who owed money to the very streets Daeho used to rule. They all wore black, as if they were already attending a funeral. They gathered in the grand dining hall, a room filled with gold-leafed mirrors and a table long enough to host a small army. At the head of the table sat Daeho in his wheelchair, dressed in a sharp black suit, looking every bit the Mafia king despite his stillness. The air was thick with fake smiles and high-pitched laughter. Sang-woo took his place at the right hand of the boss, acting the part of the devoted brother. He poured the wine with a steady hand, but Elena, standing against the wall with the other staff, saw the slight tremor in his fingers. She saw the way his eyes kept darting toward the kitchen doors. The plan was simple. A special dish of abalone porridge, Daeho's favorite, would be served. One bowl would be laced with the contents of the blue vial, a tasteless, odorless poison that would mimic a heart attack. Because Daeho was already frail, no one would question his passing. It would be seen as a mercy. Elena felt the weight of the secret in her chest. She had to be perfect. One slip of the hand, one wrong movement, and both she and the boss would be silenced forever. The kitchen was a chaotic dance of steam and silver. The head chef, a man who had been paid handsomely by Sang-woo to look the other way, plated the porridge. He placed a small sprig of parsley on one specific bowl, a signal. Elena watched from the corner, her heart thumping like a drum. When the signal was given, she stepped forward. "I will take the master's tray," she said firmly. The chef hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "The head butler usually handles the master's service," he grumbled. Elena didn't blink. "The butler is busy with the wine cellar. The master is used to my touch. Do you want to be the one to spill hot soup on the boss's lap?" The chef waved her away impatiently, his mind on the bribe he had hidden in his locker. Elena picked up the tray. 2 bowls sat side by side. One was for Daeho, marked with the parsley. The other was for Sang-woo, as he insisted on eating the same meal to bond with his brother. As she walked through the swinging doors into the dimly lit hallway, she stopped. Her breath came in short gasps. She looked down at the bowls. With a quick, fluid motion of her wrists, she swapped the positions of the bowls. She memorized the tiny chip on the rim of the poisoned one. Now, the death meant for the king was sitting on the brother's side of the tray. She smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and entered the lion's den. The dinner was a theater of cruelty. Sang-woo stood up, raising his glass of expensive whiskey. "A toast," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "To my brother, Daeho. May his spirit be as strong as his body once was. And may we always remain a united family, no matter what burdens we must carry." The relatives cheered, their eyes gleaming with the reflected candlelight. They didn't see the way Daeho's jaw tightened. They didn't see the sweat beading on his forehead. Elena moved forward with the tray. She placed the safe bowl in front of Daeho and the poisoned bowl in front of Sang-woo. Her hands were steady, her face a mask of professional indifference. Sang-woo looked down at his bowl, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "Even in his state, Daeho gets the best," he joked, looking at his brother. "Eat, brother, it will warm your soul." He picked up his spoon and took a large, greedy gulp of the porridge. He smiled at Elena, a terrifying, condescending smile. "Good work, Elena. You've always been so efficient." Elena bowed low, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Thank you, sir. I only do what is necessary for the family." She backed away into the shadows, her eyes darted to Daeho. The boss was looking at her. For the first time, there was no confusion in his gaze. There was understanding. He knew what she had done. He watched as his brother took another bite, then another, oblivious to the fact that he was swallowing his own grave. Minutes passed like hours. The conversation around the table grew louder as the wine flowed, but Sang-woo began to grow quiet. At first, it looked like he was just tired. He loosened his tie and wiped his brow with a silk handkerchief. "Is it hot in here?" he muttered, his voice sounding thick, as if his tongue were too large for his mouth. Aunt Ji-won laughed, unaware. "You've just had too much to drink, Sang-woo. Sit back and relax." But Sang-woo couldn't relax. His hand began to shake, and his spoon clattered against the porcelain bowl, the sound like a gunshot in the room. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him. He grabbed the edge of the table, knocking over a crystal glass of red wine. The liquid spilled across the white tablecloth, looking like a fresh pool of blood. I can't breathe," he wheezed. His eyes went wide with a sudden, terrifying realization. He looked at the bowl of porridge, then at the chef, then finally his gaze landed on Elena. She stood perfectly still, her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't look away. She didn't offer help. She simply watched him. Sang-woo's face turned a sickly shade of gray. He reached out toward his brother, his fingers clawing at the air. "You," he gasped, but the word died in his throat. He collapsed onto the floor, his body twitching for a few violent seconds before going completely still. The dining room erupted into chaos. Relatives screamed, chairs were overturned, and the united family scattered like rats. In the middle of the panic, Elena did something no one expected. She didn't call for an ambulance. She didn't cry for help. Instead, she walked over to the paralyzed boss. She leaned down and whispered into his ear, "The debt is paid, sir. The snake is gone." Then she did the impossible. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small electronic device, a jammer she had hidden to cut off the mansion's security cameras. She looked at Dai-ho and saw a single tear roll down his cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the dining hall burst open. It wasn't the police. It was a group of men in dark suits, the boss's loyal shadow guard, men who had disappeared after the accident. They marched in, led by a man named Kenji, Dai-ho's most trusted lieutenant. He ignored the dead body of Sang-woo and the screaming relatives. He walked straight to Dai-ho and knelt. "We received the signal, boss," Kenji said, his voice deep and loyal. Elena stepped back. The relatives froze in fear. They realized then that the paralyzed boss wasn't as helpless as they thought. He'd been working with Elena all along. She wasn't just a maid. She was the bridge between the fallen king and his hidden army. Dai-ho's hand, the one everyone thought was useless, slowly began to lift. It was a shaky, painful movement, but he raised his index finger and pointed it directly at the greedy relatives. "Get them out," Kenji commanded his men. The guards moved with surgical precision, dragging the screaming Aunt Ji-won and the trembling cousin Minho out of the hall. They were not being taken to jail. They were being taken to the basement, a place from which no traitor ever returned. Within minutes, the grand hall was empty of enemies. Only the dead Sang-woo remained on the floor, a grim reminder of the price of betrayal. Elena stood by the boss, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. The room was silent now, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Kenji turned to Elena. "How did you know where the poison was?" he asked. Elena looked at the empty bowl on the floor. "I watched the shadows," she said simply. "While they were looking at his wealth, I was looking at their hands." Then she turned back to Dai-ho. "It is time, sir. The doctor I brought from the village is waiting in the secret wing. He has the herbs that the city doctors do not understand." For months, Elena had been secretly treating Dai-ho with traditional medicines from her homeland, bypassing the treatments the family had used to keep him sedated and paralyzed. The accident hadn't made him a vegetable. The medicine Sang-woo provided had. Elena had been slowly flushing the toxins out of his system, bit by bit, every time she cleaned his room. The paralysis was fading, replaced with a cold, burning strength. Weeks passed, and the mansion remained a fortress. To the outside world, the Park family was in mourning for Sang-woo, who had died of a sudden heart condition. But inside, a transformation was taking place. In the sun-drenched solarium, Dai-ho was no longer sitting in a wheelchair. He was standing, leaning heavily on a cane, but standing nonetheless. His voice, though raspy from disuse, had regained its iron edge. "You risked your life for a man who couldn't even thank you," Dai-ho said, looking at Elena. She was pouring him a cup of bitter herbal tea. "In my village, we do not serve the title, sir. We serve the soul," she replied. Dai-ho looked at his hands, scarred and powerful. "They thought I was a statue. They thought they could carve me up." He looked at her, his eyes piercing. "I know your secret, Elena. I know why you came here. You didn't come for a job. You came for justice." Elena paused, the teapot hovering in the air. She didn't flinch. "My father was a dock worker in Busan 20 years ago. He was framed for a crime he didn't commit by your rivals. You were the only one who looked at the evidence and cleared his name. You didn't know him, but you saved him. I came to return the favor." Dai-ho smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "Then we are even, Elena. But a dragon always pays his debt with interest." The story of the Iron Dragon's miraculous recovery spread through the underworld like wildfire. Those who had tried to steal his territory during his illness suddenly found themselves facing a ghost who had come back to claim what was his. But Dai-ho was different now. The coldness was still there, but it was tempered by a new wisdom. He cleared out the corruption in his organization, starting with the heads of the family who had supported Sang-woo. He didn't kill them. He did something worse. He stripped them of every penny, every title, and every bit of dignity, leaving them to wander the streets they once looked down upon. As for Elena, she was no longer wearing a maid's apron. She became the lady of the house, not as a wife, but as the chief advisor. She sat at the long dining table where the poison had once been served, now a place of strategy and justice. People whispered about the Black Diamond who stood at the dragon's side. They said she had magic in her hands and eyes that could see through walls. But Elena knew the truth. It wasn't magic. It was simply the power of loyalty in a world built on lies. The mansion was no longer a tomb of glass and stone. It was a home. One evening, as the moon hung low over Seoul, Dai-ho and Elena sat on the balcony. The city lights twinkled below like fallen stars. "The world thinks I am the most dangerous man in Korea," Dai-ho mused, tapping his cane. "But they don't know that my life depends on a woman who knows exactly how I like my tea." Elena smiled, looking out at the horizon. "A king is only as strong as the person who guards his back when he is sleeping, sir." Dai-ho nodded. "I have a gift for you. A ship leaves for your home country tomorrow. It carries enough wealth to build a school, a hospital, and a future for everyone in your village. You are free to go, Elena. Your debt is more than paid." Elena looked at the ship's papers in his hand, then back at the man who had become her greatest ally. She thought of the dust of her village and the warmth of her family. But then she looked at the mansion, a place she had saved from the darkness. "The ship can take the gold, sir," she said softly. "But I think I'll stay. There are still too many snakes in this world, and you still haven't learned how to make your own tea." Dai-ho laughed, a sound that finally reached his eyes. And so the dragon and the diamond remained, a legend born from a swapped plate and a secret shared in the dark. But shadows never truly disappear. They only hide. A year after the dinner, a new threat emerged. A rival syndicate from the north, sensing that Dai-ho had softened, began to move into his ports. They were led by a man known as the Viper, a former protege of Dai-ho who believed the old boss was weak for relying on a woman. The Viper sent a message, a blood-stained handkerchief delivered to the mansion's gate. Dai-ho looked at the cloth, his expression grim. "He thinks because I walk with a cane I cannot strike," he whispered. Elena stood beside him, her eyes scanning the reports from the docks. "He doesn't realize that a cane is just a hidden sword, sir," she said. She had spent the last year training the mansion staff, not just in service, but in surveillance. The gardeners were lookouts. The cooks were experts in chemistry. The drivers were masters of escape. The mansion was now a living weapon. Elena knew that the Viper would try to use the same tactics as Song-woo, infiltration and poison. She tightened the security, but she knew that a frontal assault was coming. She began to prepare a plan that would make the family dinner look like child's play. The attack came on a night of pouring rain. The Viper's men scaled the walls, thinking they were silent, but Elena had installed pressure sensors in the grass. Inside the command center, she watched the monitors. "They are at the east gate," she said into her radio. Dae-ho sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking perfectly calm. "Let them in," he commanded. As the assassins entered the grand hall, the lights flickered and died. In the darkness, the sounds of struggle erupted. But it wasn't the guards fighting. It was the house itself. Hidden traps, darts tipped with the same paralytic that had once held Dae-ho, flew from the walls. The assassins fell one by one, unable to see their enemy. The Viper himself reached the study, kicking the door open. He found Dae-ho sitting by the fireplace. "Old man, your time is over," the Viper hissed, raising his gun. But before he could pull the trigger, a blade touched his throat. Elena had appeared from behind a tapestry, her movement as silent as a ghost. "In this house," she whispered, "the only thing that dies is the truth." The Viper froze. He looked into Elena's eyes and saw the same fire he had seen in Dae-ho years ago. "You're just a maid," he spat, though his voice trembled. "I am the one who kept the dragon alive when you were trying to kill him," Elena replied. She didn't flinch as the guards entered and disarmed the intruder. Dae-ho stood up, walking toward the Viper without his cane. His gait was steady, his presence overwhelming. "You forgot the first rule of the streets, boy," Dae-ho said, his voice like grinding stones. "Never underestimate the person who cleans up your mess." He didn't kill the Viper. Instead, he made him an offer. "You will work for Elena now. You will be her eyes in the north. If you fail, I will show you what Paralyzed truly feels like." The Viper, broken and terrified, knelt at Elena's feet. From that day on, the underworld knew that to cross the Maid was to cross the Mafia boss himself. The story of the Black Diamond grew, reaching far beyond the borders of Korea. The years passed, and Dae-ho's empire became something new. It wasn't just about power anymore. It was about protection. They funded orphanages and protected the small business owners who were once bullied by gangs. Elena oversaw it all, her wisdom guiding the dragon's strength. But as Dae-ho grew older, his body began to fail him again, this time from natural age. He called Elena to his bedside one autumn evening. The leaves outside were turning the color of gold and fire. "Elena," he wheezed, "I am going to a place where I cannot take my guards or my gold." She took his hand, her own skin now showing the lines of time. "I know, sir." He smiled weakly. "The secret, the one you said you knew. Tell me one last time." Elena leaned in, her voice a soft melody. "The secret is that you were never the boss, sir. You were the shield, and I was never the maid. I was the sword. Together, we were a legend." Dae-ho closed his eyes, a peaceful look on his face. "A good legend," he whispered, and with that, the Iron Dragon took his final breath. The funeral was the largest Seoul had ever seen. Thousands of people lined the streets, from the highest officials to the poorest street vendors. Elena stood at the head of the procession, dressed in a simple black hanbok. She didn't cry. Her eyes were dry and clear. She carried the Iron Dragon's signet ring on a chain around her neck. The greedy relatives, long since banished, watched from the fringes of the crowd, hoping for a chance to reclaim the wealth. But they were disappointed. Dae-ho's will was clear. The entire empire was to be converted into a public foundation managed by Elena. There was no throne left to steal. The Vipers had no venom left. Elena returned to the mansion that night. It felt empty, but not cold. She walked to the garden and sat on the bench where she had first told Dae-ho about the poison. she realized that the story wasn't over, it was just changing shape. A young girl, no older than 10, approached Elena in the garden. She was the daughter of one of the kitchen staff, a girl with bright eyes and a curious mind. "Is it true, ma'am? Is it true you swapped the plates and saved the king?" Elena looked at the child and saw herself years ago. She patted the seat beside her. "Sit down, little one," Elena said. "It is true, but the saving wasn't in the swapping of the plates. The saving was in the truth." The girl listened intently as Elena began to tell the story from the beginning. She told her about the weight of the silence, the smell of the porridge, and the spark in the old man's eyes. She taught the girl that power isn't about who has the biggest gun, but who has the most courage to do what is right when no one is looking. "Will I be a maid too?" the girl asked. Elena shook her head. "You will be whatever you choose to be, but whatever you are, be the one who watches, be the one who knows the secrets." The foundation Elena built changed the face of the city. She used the Mafia's old hidden accounts to build schools where children of all backgrounds could learn side by side. She created a system where justice wasn't bought, but earned. The black diamond became a symbol of hope. But Elena never forgot her roots. Every year, she traveled back to her village across the ocean. She walked the dusty paths where she had once played as a child. She visited her father's grave and told him about the dragon. She told him that his name was honored in a land he had never seen. She was no longer just a village girl or a mansion maid. She was a bridge between two worlds. And every time she returned to Seoul, she felt the presence of Daeho and the wind that rustled the bamboo trees. One day, a man arrived at the mansion gates. He was young, arrogant, and looked remarkably like Song-woo. It was Song-woo's secret son, raised in hiding, coming to claim his birthright. He demanded to see Elena, shouting about bloodlines and inheritance. Elena met him in the grand hall, the same room where his father had fallen. She didn't use guards to remove him. She simply handed him a small blue vial. Empty, but still chilling. "Your father died because he thought wealth was something you take," she said calmly. "Your uncle lived because he knew wealth is something you protect. You have his blood, but do you have his heart?" The young man looked at the vial, then at the powerful woman before him. He realized that there was nothing here for him to take by force. The empire of the Iron Dragon wasn't made of gold. It was made of loyalty. He lowered his head and walked away, the last of the vipers finally leaving the nest. Elena's hair turned as white as the snow that topped the mountains in winter. She moved more slowly now, but her mind remained as sharp as a razor. She had outlived her enemies and her friends. She spent her days in the library of the mansion, writing down the history of the secret years. She wanted to make sure that the truth was never lost. She wrote about the darkness of the Mafia, but also about the light that could be found within it. She wrote about a man who was paralyzed by greed and saved by a maid's hand. The book would one day be a bestseller, but for now, it was just a record for the soul. She felt a deep sense of peace. The mansion was full of life again, not the cold life of soldiers, but the laughter of students and the chatter of workers. On her 80th birthday, the city held a festival in Elena's honor. They called it the Festival of the Watcher. People wore mahogany-colored ribbons and told stories of the woman who saw everything. Elena sat on a stage, looking out at the diverse crowd. She saw people of all colors and creeds living together in a city that was once divided by fear. She realized that this was Daeho's true legacy. It wasn't the ports or the buildings, it was the peace. As the fireworks exploded over the Han River, Elena closed her eyes and whispered a thank you to the ghost of the Iron Dragon. She could almost hear him laughing, the sound no longer like dry leaves, but like a deep, echoing bell. That night, Elena had a dream. She was back in the dining hall, young and strong. The table was set for two. Daeho was sitting at the head, standing tall and healthy. He pulled out a chair for her. "The tea's ready, Elena," he said. She sat down and they talked for hours, not about business or enemies, but about the stars and the sea. In the dream, there was no poison, no paralysis, and no secrets. There was only the bond between two souls who had changed the world by trusting one another. When she woke up, the room was filled with the soft light of dawn. She felt lighter than she had in years. She knew that her time was coming to an end, and she was ready. She called the young girl, now a grown woman and the director of the foundation, to her side. "The signet ring," Elena whispered, taking the chain from her neck. "It doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to the city. Keep it as a reminder that the smallest person in the room is often the most important." The woman took the ring, tears in her eyes. "I will, ma'am. I promise." Elena nodded, satisfied. She looked out the window one last time. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the garden. She saw a bird perched on the branch of a cherry blossom tree, the same kind of bird Daiho used to watch when he was trapped in his chair. The bird took flight, soaring high into the blue sky. And so, children, the story of the Iron Dragon and the Black Diamond comes to a close. Elena passed away peacefully that afternoon, a smile on her lips. They buried her next to Daiho in a simple plot overlooking the city they both loved. People still visit the mansion today, not to see the gold, but to stand in the place where a maid once swapped a plate and changed history. They say that if you sit quietly in the garden, you can still hear the whisper of a secret on the wind. It is a secret that tells us that loyalty is stronger than poison, and that a dragon never truly dies as long as someone remembers his fire. Remember this story, and remember that your eyes are your greatest weapon. Use them to see the truth, even when the world is draped in shadows.